What comes to mind when the word art is mentioned? Perhaps a mental image of the Mona Lisa appears in your head. Maybe the sound of Beethoven's Symphony 9 rings through your ears. But would a video game ever cross your mind? Probably not. But they are still mediums of art. Think about it. The Oxford Dictionary defines art as the expression or application of human creative skill and imagination, producing works to be appreciated primarily for their beauty or emotional power. Do video games not fall in that category? To start off with, we must recognize and analyze other art forms. The oldest types of art were most likely storytelling and music. From there, we later see painting, sculpture, then landscaping and architecture. And then from that, we find acting and directing, only to jump into more recent forms of art, like photography and editing. Each of these categories have within them what many people consider to be masterpieces of human creativity, all of which have greatly contributed to cultures around the world. A Tale of Two Cities, Starry Night, The Thinker, Versailles Garden, the Hagia Sophia, Heath Ledger's performance in The Dark Knight, 2001: A Space Odyssey, and many notable photographs we see every day. Each of these cannot be compared to one another, but instead must be respected in their own context. To examine the subject properly, we must first start with a brief history of video games. The first ever video game was Tennis for Two, made in 1959. While it was a great display of the abilities of the computers of that age, computers were generally reserved for universities and science-based companies. By the early 1970s, however, technology advanced enough to allow video games to be heavily commercialized, and in 1973, Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney created the game Pong that mimicked the game Tennis for Two, and since then it has become one of the most well-known games. As the video game market spread with each new release, people saw the popularity and, more importantly, the income that video games brought in. And in an attempt to siphon some of the cash flow, third-party companies would copy other games and resell them, leading to many legal battles. The original producers tried to uphold their side of the argument through their patents, trademarks, and copyrights, but their works were not fully protected under the law. The rise of the first-person shooter games, perhaps the most violent and seemingly unartistic genre of video games, offset the goals of the developers to have their work protected. Many people thought that states should have the right to regulate the sale of video games that are violent in order to protect minors, the same way states regulate tobacco, alcohol, and pornography. To resolve this, the developers appealed to the court of law to have their works seen legally as a work of art protected under the First Amendment. In June 2011, the Supreme Court ruled in Brown v. Entertainment Merchants Association that video games are forms of speech as other forms of media are, and as such deserve the same First Amendment protections. However, many are hesitant to accept this. According to a telephone poll conducted by Farley Dickens University Public Mind, only 39% of respondents agree with the Supreme Court's decision. Games, seemingly without artistic merit, shouldn't negate the medium's overall value as an art form. However, that didn't stop journalist Robert Ebert, a notorious critic during his life, from voicing the idea that video games cannot be compared to great dramas, books, or films in terms of artistic value. Ebert believed that because a game has rules, goals, and defined objectives, it cannot be art, because the pinnacle experience of a game is not playing the game, it is winning the game. However, Ebert was sorely mistaken. Video games are considered by some to be the most immersive forms of art. With paintings or movies, there is nothing defined beyond the medium. The viewer may interpret it however he or she wants, but there's a finite amount that's given. Video games, however, especially open world or sandbox games, are infinite. The player is not just a spectator of the story, they are a part of it. The player builds relationships and rivalries with other characters. They fight through struggles, carry burdens, and have conflicts. the player gets to make decisions, making an impact in the world of the game, affecting the emotional states and standings of characters and other entities, physical, political, or otherwise. People can understandably be upset over the death of a TV show character, so the same relationship with video game characters should not be any different. What comes to mind when you think of art?
I guess paintbrushes, pencils, paper, like drawing or sketching, painting. Probably said that.
Okay. Would you ever consider video games to be art?
I guess, but I've never thought of it like that.
Why?
Well, most people see video games just for their entertainment appeal, but I guess now that you ask, they could be considered an art. Video games do require artists and graphic designers to put it all together, and they look pretty nice, and painting, music, and acting are all forms of art, and I guess video games are kind of a combination of all of those. When you look at them, there's so much more work put into them, and you have, there's the main characters, the changing scenery, like the whatever else you're using in the video game. But I don't really play much video games, but I do watch my brother sometimes while he plays, and it's entertaining to see more than just the main, attraction of, the main goal of the video game.
Thank you. But what elements makes them so artistic? Good video games have stories, plots, concepts. These stories can be as complex, rich, and engaging, or more so, than any book or movie. Being a part of a game does not negate its artistic value. It is a way to build curiosity and background, and a way to make the game enthralling instead of just fun. Games like The Last of Us, Shadow of Colossus, Silent Hill 2, and Final Fantasy VII are all noted for their fantastic storytelling. Music is also important. So many games have amazing soundtracks to invoke emotions in the player and enhance the ambiance of the environment. A good soundtrack can make or break a game. Games famous for their soundtracks include Legend of Zelda, Super Mario Galaxy, World of Warcraft, and most notably Halo 3. Paintings and modeling are what most people consider to be the primary aspect of determining whether or not video games are art. Conceiving characters and coloring the world, and having accuracy to do so without fault requires tremendous effort and dedication to making the game look beautiful. Games such as Shovel Knight, Skyrim, and Tomb Raider have all been recognized for their breathtaking visuals. Probably the most artistic aspect of a video game is world building, which involves landscaping, architecture, geography, and culture. Creating complex and interesting worlds, sometimes filled with sites, cities, planets, or even individual hovels in which countryside is necessary to hook players into the game, and is a great way to showcase the talent of developers. A considerable amount of time goes into creating a sufficiently interactive and explorable world. Games such as GTA, DayZ, and The Witcher 3 are renowned for their completely open worlds filled with fantasy-inspired or realistic cultures, places, and lore. Similarly to film, video games involve directing and editing, allowing the developers to work towards an idea without going off track and without errors. Making a video game requires meticulous preparation, debugging, and envisioning. Art is about creatively expressing thoughts or emotions that are hard or impossible to communicate through verbal means. Games are not just any kind of art, they are the most revolutionary form of art mankind has ever known. Video games bring together many of the traditional forms of art, text, sound, video, imagery, and tie them together with the ability to interact with the platform directly. This allows video games to create something unique, beyond all other forms of media. Although unconventional, video games redefine the concept of art, and therefore should be given the same prestige as the forms of art treasured by most.